So I am obsessed with book dedications. I probably think about them the way people think about their Oscars speech. And you have a great one. You dedicate this book to your parents, who you say instilled in you that there were no limits on what a girl could do. I found that really moving because we're probably the first generation of women who feel that in any way.
Yes.
Not everybody does. How did they do that?
Such a good question. I'm extremely close to my parents. I didn't even consider anybody else for the book dedication, including my husband. I talk to them several times a day, just got off the phone with both of them 20 minutes ago. I think that, first of all, my parents, they didn't always take my side in the sense that they felt like everything you do is right, but they always had my back, and they made it really, really clear. They were the kind of parents who, if you said, I didn't like something a teacher did, they never thought like, well, the teacher must be right because they are the authority. They were like, you must be right because you have a good head on your shoulders. If something doesn't feel right or if something feels off, trust your gut. And I don't think there is anything that you can give a child that's as valuable as that. How you feel, yeah, and that instinctually, if something's not right, you will know. I just think that that gave me a sense of security and safety that was like, okay, if I'm not feeling comfortable, I can get myself out of there. And I never have to worry that my parents will second guess that or doubt that I was authentically feeling that way in that moment. But the second part of the dedication is the part that nobody will understand beside my parents. But yes, I thank them for always believing that there were no limits to what a girl could do. And I agree with you. We are definitely the first generation where a parent could say that and mean it, and still not for everyone, as you said, but definitely for some people. The second part was that I always felt like they really encouraged my single-minded, psychotic determination. And the second part of the dedication thanks them for letting me go to FAO Schwartz when I had 104-degree fever because I had begged for a Madame Alexander doll, which was all the rage when I was a kid.
I remember those.
And my dad had said, I will take you. So girly of me. My dad said, I'll take you after school with my grandmother, who came too. And when they came to pick me up, I had a truly raging fever. And my dad was like, we'll go another day. You should go home. And I was like, we're going today. I want to go today. And they took me to FAO Schwartz, and they lay me down across the cash register, like where the cashier was standing. And the saleswoman brought the dolls out one by one as I pointed and said, no, I don't want that one.
This is also so New York.
It's so New York. It's so crazy. And I can tell you for sure that my parents have always said, you can do whatever you set your mind to, because they let me do that.
You could trace it all back.
It all goes back to 4th grade Madame Alexander doll shopping.
So my dad, he always had this saying, it's like a very popular saying, but an MRS degree, right? Like go to college. Yes. There are some people that go for like to be a wife or just to say they have. That's probably not as popular anymore. Right. However, I've always felt grateful to him in some way that he treated me and my brother the same. And it annoyed me growing up because my friends' fathers treated them like they were women or girls. Yeah. And my dad treated me fully the same. Yeah. Later in life, I've appreciated that. Where do you fall on that?
It's interesting. I mean, my mom has always been such an avowed feminist, and she really brought that second wave feminist energy into the household. Yeah. I mean, my dad is the child of refugees, really has, like, in some ways a European sensibility. And so I think he actually knows more people who to this day see more of a difference between men and women. He was never like that. He always felt, I would say, I mean, I have an older brother, and he totally expected the same from both of us. I mean, he taught us how to ride our bikes. If you fall, you get right back up. All of that. I think if anything, he gave me a little bit more of a sense, though, of an awareness that the world might not do that. That, like, to be conscious from a young age that I feel things are equal, whatever your brother's doing, you can do too, but other people might not, and you have to be on your guard a little bit for that. He never excused it, but I do feel like I kind of knew that was out there a little bit, even though I had the lucky experience of always being taken really seriously and not treated like, girl.
So today we're talking about teenage girls. We're going to be talking about them almost for the entire hour. How did you feel as a teenage girl? Were you silenced? Were you empowered?
I was really loud.
You were?
I talked a lot. Yeah, I did. I talked a lot. I was a typical, like, always raise your hand, always want to be called on, super competitive girl. I still feel, obviously I wrote this whole book about teenage girls, so of course it's not surprising that I still feel being a teenage girl is sort of practicing like a dark magic. I think that it's a really powerful time and it's a really powerful demographic. I never felt held back as a teenage girl. It's only in retrospect, I think, that I recognize the ways in which inevitably, as a class, even if you're the luckiest, and I grew up so lucky, that you are kind of...
It's only in hindsight.
Yeah, it's only in hindsight. At the time, I really didn't feel that way. Also, I feel that a lot, and I reflected on that a lot when I was writing this book, that when I started my career, having worked in women's magazines, I felt very insulated from a lot of those things. And then in retrospect, I see how it peaks in.
Yeah.
But as a teenage girl, I was, yes, very loud, definitely not silenced. I'd like to have seen anyone try. The only thing that I do feel, and that I thought a lot about writing the book, and it's in there a little bit, is that when I was a teenager, I did feel like the battle for feminism is won and over. I felt like that was my mom's generation.
And then you get to the workforce.
And then you get to the workforce.
I felt the same way.
Yeah, I was like, we're free now. We're good.
Yep.
And then it's a true life comes at you fast kind of moment.
It does, and it's a personal experience, and then it's the way you see other women are treated.
Totally.
Yeah, I agree.
And your friends go through it, and you're kind of like, should we talk about this? And you do have that moment, I think, of wondering, is it just me? Am I being too sensitive?
Oh yeah, I had like 2 or 3 years of that.
Yeah. That's the degree that you're secretly earning that you don't know about, and just like the way the world works.
I had a boyfriend say to me, like, do you think you think about all of this too much and that's why it's happening?
Right.
And
you're
I was
manifesting sexism?
Yeah, I'm manifesting misogyny. I was like, let me get back to you on that.
Yeah, I'm going to reflect. I'm going to think about it. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think thinking about it in hindsight is really valuable. There are experiences that at the time I wouldn't have classified them that way at all. Mm-hmm. And then in retrospect, I'm like, I was so young and so taken advantage of in that moment. And to me, it felt like, I'm a grown professional woman. Like, this is all going super well. And I don't know that necessarily, I mean, I wish we lived in a world where that wasn't true. I don't feel that I wish I had known it at the time. In some ways, I'm glad that I didn't. But I think that's the reminder that's the naivete, I think, of being a teenage girl, which can be a huge asset because everything seems changeable and on the horizon and immediate. And it's only when you get older that you think, wow, I can't believe I really thought we were done with that. We're definitely not.
I do, and I don't know if I think I'm an eternal optimist, so maybe this is naivete, but I still think everything is changeable. It's just that not everything has changed the way I thought it did.
Yeah, it's a lot of people have asked me in the book writing process whether the whole experience left me feeling optimistic or pessimistic, because this book is a chronicle of social change and also the way it illustrates the ways in which sometimes things go backward before they go forward again. And I would say that I do feel optimistic because I think when you're a student of history, you read and you watch and you see that everything seems like it's fixed until all of a sudden something breaks and it changes.
And then the pendulum swings and then it comes back.
Yeah. But everything always seems disastrous and catastrophic until something snaps. And obviously the book is about the ways in which teenage girls have contributed to that. Mm-hmm. The snap.
Snap is a great word for it. Me Too felt like a snap.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things are like that. And then the dust settles and things, regress, and it's not the revolution you hoped it would be, but incremental movement by incremental movement, you can look back and say, well, it's really different now than it was. Feminism is not done, but it's true that when, not too long ago, my grandmother couldn't have had a credit card in her own name. So that's changed.
There's an aspect to your book, and we're gonna fully dive in, but there's an aspect to your book that I think the press I've read around it hasn't talked about, and maybe because it's too philosophical.
Okay.
So many people that are around our age, I'll be at dinner and they'll be like, it's just so anxiety ridden right now. So much is wrong. There's so much to discuss. There's all of this. And I was a political science major, so like you, a student of history in many ways. Mm-hmm. And if you look back in history, social change any political change feels like a snap, but it's actually 50 years, 100 years. And your book chronicles change that while something snapped, the actual effects of it are really slow. And it's almost a relief, I think.
Yeah, to know that we're like still living in the aftermath of every single one of those
that everything's
reverberations.
Not so bad.
Yeah.
That we're just part of the reverb.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I think one of the things, the book doesn't spend a ton of time on, you know, what the solutions are to some of the existential problems that come up in the book. But one of the things that I do think is a real balm, and when I talk to young activists, they say this a lot, and I've tried to say this too, is the answer to some of that feeling is truly to be in community with people who are both older and younger than you are. Mm-hmm. And I feel that intensely, having grown up in a real community, that some of that is just the narrowness of our own perspective, which of course we have because we only live in our own lives. But people who are a lot older and people who are a lot younger widen the aperture and show you that like you're living in this tiny narrow band, and how could you not be? We're just one person like moving through, you know, the moving walkway of our own lives. But to be with people who are in their 80s and to be with people who are 16 shows you the breadth of what happens in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. And I do find that, yeah, a relief is a good word. I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but I do think that that's that exhale of like,
it's the breath.
It doesn't have to happen in the next 30 seconds to feel confident that it will happen. It will unfold.
And that the inching matters. The inches become feet, and you know, it just matters.
I think what feels hard when you're really young is the damage done by waiting feels so burdensome that every second that it's not happening is a second of someone's life not being as just as it should be. And of course, that is so painful. But I think when you talk to people who are, in their 70s and their 80s and their 90s, to be with people who can say, when I look back, I could tell you when I was born what this world looked like compared to what it looks like now. It's hopeful. It's really hopeful.
Even our grandmothers, the world was completely different.
Completely different.
2 generations, right? And then, like you said, the 16-year-olds share what can be, what they envision.
Yeah, and they're not going to sit there telling you all the reasons it probably won't happen, because for them, it's literally sitting right on the horizon. And I think that it is really important, therefore, to not only be with your own cohort. It's good to see the sweep of history a little bit.
I always say that with women. I think it's like so important to have women older than you and like women younger than you that you're in community with. And I've never thought it, I guess, in terms of relief or social change. I just thought about it in terms of learning and teaching.
Yeah, and I think the perspective of it, what feels so massive and huge, life-altering, someone else will be like, you know, it's like, even before my wedding, which was so exciting, you know, I was with a much older friend who was like, I've had 3 of those. Yeah. And I was like, okay, like even something like that is kind of like,
puts it into perspective.
It's humbling. It's like, the reality is none of us ever know what's coming, but someone who's a lot older can tell you a little bit more just how little you know. And sometimes there's comfort in that.
So your book is about teenage activists, teenage female activists. We're going to be talking about activists and activism so much. Can you kind of dumb down what is an activist?
Yeah, I would say the thing that the girls in the book have in common is they're people who woke up in a world where they felt something should be different. Something that felt obvious to them should be different. So for some of them, they were very attached to movement work. You know, they were talking about abolition and touring the country, giving speeches about abolition and during the Civil War. And for some people, it was suffrage. They wanted the right for women to vote. For other people, it's more personal. You know, there's a chapter in the book that's about the beginning of coeducation in the US. And there's a girl who all she really wants is, she doesn't think of herself as a movement person. She just wants to go to Stuyvesant, which is one of the best high schools in New York. And at the time when she wants to do that, it's only open to boys. And so she becomes this crusader to get girls admitted to Stuyvesant. But what she really wants is just like a harder math class, you know?
Yeah, it was for her personal endeavor.
Totally. I think to me, like any way into it, all things are equal. I don't care whether somebody wanted to do it for personal advancement or for some ideal. I think what the girls have in common is, and what activism really is that feeling of there's a problem in the world and I'm going to do what I can to fix it. Sometimes that takes, you know, the form of demonstration. Sometimes that takes the form of a legal case. But whatever it is, it's a process of betterment for society.
I've followed your writing for years. I told you before we started, I'm such a Mattie Kahn fan. You have a beautiful perspective. It's political, socio-political, and funny and irreverent in some ways, which I'm now understanding is kind of from your mom.
That's right. Let's give her credit. Nessa.
Yes. What pieces led you to writing this book?
So I think they're the obvious ones. I profiled Greta Thunberg when I was at Glamour for one of the Glamour Women of the Year covers. I spent a lot of time with the teenagers who were part of the Parkland movement and started March for Our Lives, and those were kind of the obvious connections. I do think that the seeds for the book are kind of really old. In my first job out of college, I worked at Elle magazine, and I spent time with a girl who was at the time 11 years old named Marley Diaz, who has since been a Netflix executive producer and gone to Harvard and done all kinds of impressive things. But when I met her, she was collecting 1,000 books with Black girls as the main characters. And we did a little interview for the site, and we asked her what she wanted to be when she grew up, and she said she wanted to be a magazine editor. And I don't know, I think this a little bit is the piece of me that's in the book. This was my first job. I had not been in it for very long. And so I had no sense of why it was ridiculous to say, oh, let's have her come be a magazine editor this summer. We'll give her an internship. I too was young enough that I was like, that seems normal and that'll be fine. We could try that. My wonderful boss, Leah Chernikoff, said, okay, if you think you can make it worthwhile, let's do it. We had Marley come back that summer.
Wow.
We had interviews with Larry Wilmore, interviews with Ava DuVernay that we went on location to interview her in New Orleans. Marley interviewed Hillary Clinton, who was running for president. And just for those watching and listening, I will say I do think it's one of the best interviews Secretary Clinton has ever done, because Marley asked her about being a child, about being a girl in school, about finding her voice there. And we did that for, a few weeks over the summer, and I felt this feeling of renewed, optimism and joy in work, which, as you know, can easily become a slog. But seeing it through her eyes and seeing her sense of, why wouldn't we ask Secretary Clinton for an interview? Like, why would she say no? You know? And the crazy thing was, she was right. She didn't say no. She said yes. It made me feel like things were possible in this way that even at that stage, I was feeling faltering on a little bit. And Marley and I have stayed really close. I wrote her college recommendation. I texted her last night. And I think that was one of the projects that made me think there is something here. There is something to being a young woman that is really powerful.
That's one of your younger friends.
That's one of my younger friends.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I'm one of her older friends. And let me tell you, nothing will make you feel elderly like writing a book about teenage girls when you're in your late 20s and early 30s. These girls think I'm ready for my AARP card. I mean, they think I'm 100.
Wait till they get here.
I mean, one day they will be humbled.
Yeah.
But this is what we're saying about intergenerational friendship.
So your new book, Young and Restless, is about the people who have helped spark America's transformative social movements throughout history, AKA teenage girls.
That's right.
So I want to know a few examples of stories, maybe one or two that you can share with us that, because you have a bunch in there that are great, but one or two that really stood out to you that can sort of set the stage for our conversation.
Yeah, totally. One of the stories I love is of Mabel Ping-Hua Lee, who's a Chinese immigrant, again, a teenager. She is living in New York at a time where the Chinese population is really small because of discriminatory immigration policies. She's a total star in high school, and then she goes to Barnard, where she's one of very, very few Chinese students, and she becomes involved in the suffrage movement. And I love her story because I think there is a savviness to her awareness that in some part, the mostly white women who are running the suffrage movement like her and want her to do this work because she is a spectacle, because she doesn't look like other people. And on the other hand, she is also smart enough to know I can get something from this too. I can get what I want. I can say what I want to say, even though maybe there's something a little uncomfortable about the reason I'm getting this platform. I think one of the things that the book deals with a lot is that tension of, on the one hand, these are girls who have something to say. On the other hand, sometimes part of the reason they're getting a big microphone is because there's something so precocious and charismatic about seeing a young woman open her mouth. So I think Mabel really had that awareness and used her microphone sort of to her advantage. She spoke all over the place. She gave these talks to these huge audiences and often told people just how wrong they were, which of course I loved. And there was a newspaper report at the time that said that people left Mabelized by her talks, like that she was so infectious and so articulate that people were just converted on the spot.
Do you see a lot of these young teenage activists grow up to continue their activism?
So Mabel doesn't. She gets her PhD in economics at Columbia, this is like the early 1900s. It's an absolutely insane thing to do. And then her dad dies around the time of the Depression, and instead of becoming this amazing crusader for women's rights, she runs his church, and that's where she spends the rest of her life.
Wow.
When I was doing the research, I was like, no, Mabel, like, go be bigger than that, you know? And I think that was one of the impulses I had to check is I want every single girl who's in this book to go on to have a blazing career. But you can't decide for other people what they're going to do with their talents. So I'm happy that we live in a world where it's more possible for young women to make that decision to stick with it. And I also honor the fact that if you spent your adolescence doing this, maybe you want to be an account manager somewhere and you don't want to do this and you live your values in a different way. I mean, I'll just say as another example, the girl that I mentioned who decided she wanted to go to Stuyvesant and wanted the school to be co-ed won that case, but actually her family moved before she ever had a chance to go. And she went to another great high school, and generations of girls have gone to Stuyvesant thanks to her, and she became a doctor. And I asked her, did you ever think about kind of staying in movement work? And she said, I feel like I have. I treat my patients, I bring healthcare to a small community. I feel like I'm totally living out exactly what I would have wanted for that girl. So I think that's the
Living
thing.
out your values is a really interesting way to look at it. Because
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways to live out your values.
Yeah, and you don't have to be that person who is, you know, speaking to 10,000 people to be the kind of person that your teenage self would be really proud of and to keep doing that work in a different way.
There's a tweet from Barack Obama in response to March for Our Lives activists fighting for gun reform after the Parkland shooting that rings in my brain all the time. You know the one I'm talking about? Yeah. And he says, I'm paraphrasing, but almost all great social movements are led by young people.
Yes.
And we all kind of know that to be true, but nobody had ever said it
totally.
out there online like that. In doing these interviews and writing your book, what is it? Why do young people, particularly young women most of the time, lead social movements?
Yeah, I think young people have a really low tolerance for hypocrisy, and part of the work of social change is calling that out. I also think, I mean, adolescence is a time of individuation. It's the job of an adolescent to say to their parents, you're wrong about everything. So it's a good opportunity to get involved in social change and embarrass your parents in a much more public way. Yeah. So I think developmentally, it makes sense that the age group is the kind of age group that's calling out hypocrisy, that's wanting to change things, that's wanting to, like call out what they find unfair. I think one of the things that makes young women particularly suited to this work is not at all because girls are born with these qualities, but because we raise girls to be collaborative, to ask themselves what they can do for others. I mean, I think this is the positive side of some of the negative aspects of how we socialize young women. Yeah, we tell them, you know, be self-sacrificing, be a good friend, be good at your school group projects. And I think we have accidentally minted generations of really, really good activists and organizers because that's what we tell girls to be good at.
So it reminds me of this line in your book. It says, the set of tools girls wield to achieve their aims, friendship, gossip, and a taste for drama. Why do girls historically bring those three things to the table when it comes to activism? Yeah,
well, I'll confess that on the friendship front, my vision is so clouded by my own friendships. I feel like everything I've ever achieved in life has been driven by my ability to always have that base of support with my female friends. I just feel I would be nowhere without them.
Have you always felt that?
Yes.
I didn't feel that till I was older.
I would say when I was young, I really had one best friend, and I didn't feel I needed anyone but her.
Me too.
Yeah, and she's thanked in the acknowledgments.
Oh.
Yeah. And we were inseparable sisters, and so I would say I always felt I needed one. I think when I got older, I realized that the value of having a group of women.
Community. They don't have to be in the same group.
No, but also the sounding board, like to be able to, you know, take it to a group chat and say, this thing just happened, like, what's your read? Sometimes you want a chorus of voices there, not just one. Yep. So I definitely brought my own sense of the value of friendships to writing the book. But I think what I also, part of that assertion comes out of just how often some of the same dynamics came up in story after story. It's like Barbara Johns is planning a school walkout because she wants better conditions for her school at the very beginning of the civil rights movement. And what does she do? She goes and talks to a bunch of other girls and one boy, they're allowed to, in the school bleachers to say, what should we do about this? And Alistair Rivera, who brought girls into Stuyvesant, had been talking to a friend in the cafeteria when she realized, you know what, we should apply, we should give it a go. It was just one setting after another where I saw these same things happening. First, girls were talking about it, and then they were doing it. The first chapter is about the Lowell mill girls who strike and walk out of their textile mills in the 1830s. Page after page of their diaries and these journal entries they wrote were about, you know, I talked to the other girls. I said, I think this is unfair. Do you also think it's that way? So friendship seemed inextricable to me, to the work of building social movements. I mean, the process of organizing is the process of conversion. You need to bring people with you to the cause. So it's like if you've got a lot of friends, you're starting from a better position.
You're coloring a quote for me that I always talk about and cite, and I don't think I understood the true meaning. Gloria Steinem always says that every great social movement starts with women in somebody's kitchen or a basement saying, oh my God, that happened to me too.
Yes. And
I loved the notion of it, but she is an organizer. She knows the history the way you do. You're totally giving it a new meaning.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I love that Gloria Steinem says that, and I think it's funny. There's a point in the book where it turns out that this conference that's happening at a Catholic college of all places becomes the place where Our Bodies Ourselves, where the germ of that book is written. Mm-hmm. Our Bodies Ourselves obviously being this iconic text that's all about, like, is this normal? Is this happening to everyone?
Yeah.
And it comes out of this session called Women in Their Bodies that literally is women sitting in a room talking about their doctors, talking about how they have felt treated by the medical establishment, talking about how they don't know what's going on with themselves because no one's ever told them. So I think it really is true. And I think I think of that as a revolutionary text. I don't think something has to be a manifesto to be totally, instantly revolutionizing and iconic. And I think when women talk, it's just the germs of revolution are planted there.
It's really well said. You talk about respectability politics being a major theme that girls have historically had to navigate in social movements. What are respectability politics?
I mean, I think that it probably isn't a surprise to anybody that if you are going to be held up as the figurehead of a movement, you're going to have a really narrow set of ways in which you're expected to behave. I mean, people want you to be polite. They want you to dress a certain way. They want you to look approachable. You know, if you're going to be involved in demanding civil rights, maybe that you pick someone who seems nice. I think we all grew up in the era of thinking Rosa Parks was like a 100-year-old nice little woman. She wasn't that old, and she wasn't that quiet, but part of the way that she sort of became canonized in popular culture was as this really feeble, quiet woman who was, you know, not scary to people, that she was kind of made fangless by the process of turning her into this icon of civil rights. So I think that comes up a lot in terms of our expectations.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I had this vision that she was like 80 years old.
Me too,
yeah.
with like a cane or something.
Exactly. Literally, they turned her into
Did you guys have that?
Mrs. Claus.
This is all news to you.
How old was she actually?
She's, in her like 40s when all this is happening.
Not that old.
Not that old. Yeah, and also like a radical organizer for her entire life.
Wow.
Yeah, one of the first people to be demanding investigations into the rapes of Black women, huge organizer of youth, which comes up in the book, that she was extremely dedicated to the next generation of young activists, and that was something that motivated her. A totally fierce woman, but of course it benefits kind of the story of how change happens to paint her as someone who was never demanding anything and, you know, was just minding her own business. That's not true. She was a total radical. And I think that girls are subject to that there are ways in which we expect girls to behave in public. On the other hand, something that I do feel is that girls have just ever so slightly more latitude in terms of how they behave in public than grown women do. And that's part of the reason that I think girls have often been the figureheads of these movements. They're allowed to get away with just a little bit more.
A little bit more of what?
Imagine a woman, a grown professional woman, who's like sobbing or screaming in public. She will not do well. I mean,
Hysterical.
We know how society treats those women.
Yeah.
But a teenage girl who is crying or who is shouting or who's waving her finger in your face, we just allow a little bit more from them.
That's the drama, gossip, friendship thing you were talking about.
Totally.
That's the drama.
That's the drama.
That's the drums.
the being a little over the top, being a little too much.
And we allow that.
We allow that.
I want to talk about some of the figureheads in our current day that we probably all know. Emma Gonzalez, who's now ex-Gonzalez, she became the figurehead of the Parkland shooting and the March for Our Lives movement. The Cut did a piece on her, I want to say like last year, that gave me chills. She kind of recounted her experience post March for Our Lives. In hindsight, in many ways, we think about our high school experience. She talks about, in hindsight, what this activist experience was like. And I had never considered some of the things that she had gone through.
Yeah.
Talk to me about celebrity and activism in this day and age.
So ex-Gonzalez is a good point, and I actually recently talked to them for another story, and I think that's that whole world navigating all of that. You can see why it would put such a burden on a person.
Yeah.
I think that in a way, America has always been in the business of sort of minting child stars. We've always had a weakness for a young celebrity, and so I think that in some ways, the culture as a whole can't help but if you see a visible girl, the apparatus that makes sense to kind of pluck her into is the child star apparatus. Like that is our
There's
mode.
an aesthetic that you talk about too, right? She had the shaved head.
Yeah.
Like they looked different.
Totally. And it became like this instant icon.
Yeah.
And then once you become kind of a bumper sticker, I don't know how much people want to engage in what you're actually saying. And I think that was one of the things that was so hard for them. They weren't just a figurehead or a clever tweet. They were trying to communicate something about what needs to change in this country. And I think one of the ways we as a society neutralize girls is by turning them into a celebrity rather than engaging with their ideas. And that is one of the difficulties about writing this book. I so wanted to avoid that when I was talking about these girls. And one of the things that I tried to do was always contextualize them within the movements and really articulate what they're actually fighting for. But I think in the same society that created Disney child stars, that is our mode for understanding what it means to be a young person in public.
We have Hannah Montana and ex-Gonzalez.
Those are the two poles. I mean, that's what we've got. Yes, I think that's right.
What are some of the less perceptible dangers that these girls deal with? I mean, the most obvious is the people that don't agree with them, that challenge their existence in their lives.
I think the second most obvious maybe, and the one that weighs on people the most, is the feeling that this whole problem, whatever their problem is that they're articulating, is theirs alone to fix. I talked to Jamie Margolin, who was deeply, deeply involved in climate change work, and 0 Hour, which is the organization she co-founded. And she was saying how when she was at the height of her activism as a teenager, she felt like she couldn't go to her grandfather's birthday party, because how could she say that going to a family event was more important than the fate of the planet? You know, when you're a teenager, you do see things in black and white. And of course, if you're given the choice between choosing for what's going to happen to the world and going to a birthday party, like the world is more important. I think that's a really dangerous way to look at your activist work. And of course, it's a total recipe for burnout.
Right.
So I think there are the foes that come from the outside who try to belittle or degrade or humiliate. And I mean, I have been in some of these girls' mentions, and it is absolute trash fire out there. But then there's also the voice inside yourself that says you're not doing enough. You should be working harder. You're not making the progress you should be making. Why doesn't everyone see it the way you see it? And that voice can be devastating. And I think that's one of the reasons that we do see these girls burn out, because how can any one person carry that for so long?
The idea of reclaiming time, reclaiming a word, has, I think, been in the zeitgeist in the last 5 years more so. Obviously, I think of slut, fat, queer, the N-word, all words that communities are reclaiming. You write that the term girl is a freighted one.
Yeah.
I was really shocked to hear that. What baggage does the word girl carry?
I think that, you know, it's funny because I used it pretty unthinkingly in the beginning. And then I encountered more people who said, are you sure you want to call them girls? Do you want to call them young women instead? I think that the reason that girl is complicated is because it's sometimes a way for an adult man in particular to talk about an adult woman. So yeah, I don't think you should be calling adult women girls. I don't think you should be calling adult men boys. Like, we should just call people what they are. But I think that actually being a girl is really powerful. And I would hate for the book to somehow distance itself from a time that I think is really special and really consequential and can unleash a lot in a person. Like, I don't want to back away from that word.
You just made my heart jump.
Yeah.
So we're reclaiming the word girl.
I think so. I was proud to be one.
Too.
I am proud to know them. I think that it deserves to be respected on its own terms. I think it's like any word. If someone asks you not to call them that, don't call them that. But if there's otherwise, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Now that you say this, I'm thinking so much of this podcast is me trying to heal my young girl. I thought it was really hard to be a teenage girl.
It is hard. It's still hard.
Yeah.
I think that's the flip side of anything that's really determinative, which being a teenage girl is hugely determinative for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. It's going to be hard. And I think becoming the person you want to be is the hardest job in the world, and we're all doing it all the time. And especially being a teenager is, I think, really hard. And it's hard now for a million reasons. I'm glad I didn't have to do it through COVID or, any of these other things that people have had to deal with. I also think, again, it's a time of huge potential, and it's powerful to revisit that. I mean, obviously, I spent a lot of time thinking about my teenage self when I was working on this book. Yeah. I have a lot of compassion for her. She wanted a lot, And
you have a lot of compassion for her?
Yeah.
I think I need more compassion for mine.
You do. And I don't even know anything about her, but I still feel that way. I think it's so hard to feel close to adulthood and to know that you're not there yet. And I think it leads people to do all kinds of crazy things, and some of them are great, and some of them are really bad ideas.
That's sort of like why the Britney song "I'm Not a Girl, Not Yet a Woman"
she was onto something. Yes,
it's rung true in all of us.
Listen, she had wisdom.
Yeah. Or her writers did, whoever.
They all contributed to that beautiful finished product.
I'm going to borrow a quote from the New York Times in 2021. For American teenagers, their political coming of age has been a tumultuous one. They've seen the boundary-breaking candidacies of women and people of color and the norm-shattering presidency of Donald Trump. They lived through racial justice protests, a pandemic, and attacks on American democracy. Given the challenges that you've written about in your book, the past generations of girls have pushed through a lot. I think all generations of girls really have, but what do you think the world of activism looks like for teenage girls moving forward, and how has social media changed the game?
Social media has changed the game in every way. You can organize a 30,000 person march in about 15 minutes, not something that used to be possible. You can get the word out so quickly, you can raise money so quickly.
You can also share lies quickly.
You can also share lies quickly, and I also think you can have a lot of exposure really fast as a young person, very, very, very quickly, before you know what you want to say, before you feel like you have a sense of exactly what you're fighting for. And I think that's really overwhelming and can be really dangerous for young people. Mm-hmm. I don't think necessarily that this time in history is uniquely bad. As I always say to people, I do think there's what to be depressed about, but if you ask me whether I would want to go be dropped into some other moment in history, the answer is definitely no. There's never been, for all the problems, there has never been a better time to be an ambitious young woman. But
say that again.
It's true.
For the people in the back.
It's true. You would not want to be in another time. I think that the difference, the thing that social media accomplishes is, I don't think it's true that in other times young people have had so much awareness of the problems that they face outside of their own lives. Yeah. So of course things have been reprehensible for many points throughout our history, but you didn't experience all of those things at once. Whereas now you're a young person sitting in class, you're going about your day to day, and you have an awareness of every wrong thing that's going on in every single country, in every single zip code in the United States, and every single place around the world at once. It's a lot to hold.
You used to have that somewhat like at the 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock news.
Right.
And not all of it.
And you weren't holding it in your pocket while you were trying to, answer your spelling test. I mean, the ways in which it interferes in every aspect of your life is, I think, new. And it can feel immobilizing because it's all flooding at you so fast. So what do you do about it? Yeah. I think one thing that young people can do, and that some of the people I talk to in the book do, is to just choose one thing. To choose it and engage with it in real life. So whether that's your community garden, or you want to get involved in a social justice movement that's happening in your town over one particular law that's being passed, or one particular housing development that's being built that you want to fight for, or one particular thing, you can get your hands dirty in that, and you can feel what it feels like to organize in person with people. I think the internet's amazing, and more importantly, I think the internet's not going anywhere. So we have to learn how to engage with it responsibly and to make use of the good parts. But there is no replacement for in-person community. And every single organizer I spoke to, including the people who do tons of work on the internet, will say the same thing. You've got to be with people in person. You have to feel that you're all facing the stakes of this, whatever it is, together as actual human beings.
There's such an element, something you mentioned at the top of the conversation too, of like, don't boo, vote.
Yeah.
Like, if you're upset about something, you gotta take it. It feels worse to like sit and talk about how gun violence sucks.
But I think "don't boo, vote" came from a place of like, if you want to change it, this is what you have to do. I would say on the at the same time, or like running on a parallel track is kind of like, if you want to feel better, this is what you have to do.
Yeah,
you will feel better if you're out there.
Way better.
And there are people who have said, you know, Greta Thunberg herself says this, but also tons of other climate activists have said that actually the work of activism has made them feel better about the world, not worse. That knowing more and being more involved has actually helped them, because there's nothing as paralyzing as anxiety that has nowhere to go. So give it somewhere to go.
Speaking of hope, you say that this book is filled with hope. Yeah. Hope is one of my favorite words in the English language. I often say this to my friends going through breakups. When you're really sad, the only thing that can make you feel better is the idea of hope. Hope for who you will meet, hope for the experiences you will have. Like, the idea that it can get better is full of excitement. Why is this book filled with hope?
To me, the idea that in generation after generation, people have wanted the world to be better is a very, very hopeful thing. The idea that people wake up and ask themselves, what can I do to realize that universe? That brings me tremendous hope. I mean, I think that it's not hard to find the stories that will make you feel hopeless. Those are everywhere, so I didn't need to write a book of those. But I think the fact that people come together and change things, and that, you know, in a funny way, that it has always been dependent to some degree on this partnership between people in power and people out of power to bring about that change. I mean, all credit to people out of power, who are the ones who are usually doing this, but I do find it hopeful that whatever the reasons were that they did that, you know, eventually men, benighted though they may be, voted to enfranchise women. Women couldn't vote to give themselves the vote. I mean, that's not how it works. People in power have to cede power. They have to be forced, absolutely. They've never given it up by choice. But the idea that there can ever be that partnership, that people can actually be compelled to share influence, is a hopeful thing to me, because it runs so counter to what human nature is, which sometimes is pretty bleak. And I find that to be very hopeful. And I also find girls growing up to be very hopeful. I feel the world is so lucky to, you know, year after year, get a new crop of young women who want to change things.
Was this book at all a form of activism for you?
Oh, good question. I feel, having spent so much time with activists I admire so much, so reluctant to put myself on their level. I feel like I am so in awe of what it takes, the determination, the tenacity to keep going. I feel the book is a work of observation and a work of bearing witness to these stories, so that other people can recognize what a long line of activists they're in. I feel very much a writer. Sometimes I feel a writer at the expense of being a doer, which is sometimes makes me wonder whether I'm on the right side of the equation. But I do think that we wouldn't know these stories if no one wrote them down. And I often grieve how many stories we don't know because nobody wrote them down. So I feel someone needs to be doing this part of the work, and I'm happy to be in that chair.
How do your parents feel?
Oh my God, they're so excited. They'll talk to anyone about it. I mean, my dad's literally walking down the street telling people, my daughter's book comes out on Tuesday. Yeah, they're tremendously excited. I am also lucky. My mom's a writer, so I got this from her. My dad's an artist. As we always say, we're the only family where being a doctor seems weird. Like, what's that? An accountant?
That's awesome.
Bizarre. But they're super proud. My dad will say, I always knew she would do it. I don't know that I feel that's true, but yeah, there's no replacement for having really supportive people in your corner. Whether they're your parents, obviously that's great. If you don't have supportive parents, go out and find some older people who will just root for you no matter what, who think anyone who says anything bad about you is trash. Just find that person and put them in the parent slot. They can go there. I think, what I said in the beginning is true. It gives you this psychological sense of home, that there's always a safe place to go. I really wish that for everyone. It's really nice.
What was the surprising difficulty of this book? Did you find most authors I have on here say that having a book, and I have mostly women, so they say writing a book was harder than having a baby, and that was the hardest thing they thought they had done?
Oh God, when I have a baby, I'll let you know which one's worse.
This is a bad phrase now, but a labor of love.
Totally.
Where did the tears come? When did they come?
The writing is the hardest part, honestly. I love talking to people and I love listening to people, so the research phase for me is always really fun. I mean, one of the reasons I continue to stick with writing, even though I often find it exhausting, is because I think of myself as someone who gets to be professionally curious, and I cannot imagine a better way to spend your time. I mean, I indulge my every interest.
It's the best.
On a regular basis, and most people don't live like that. So I don't want to give that up. Sitting in front of a screen, figuring out how to tell these complicated stories, making sure you're doing justice to people who've given you their time, or people you respect so much who, you want to tell their story in a complete way, that is agonizing. And every successive read of the book, which at this point now I've read many, many times, makes you feel like you want to revisit every decision you've ever made in your life. But I would say the writing is always the part that's hard. The talking is always the part that's fun.
You're very good at both.
Thank you so much. In a way, it's funny to be on the other side. I guess, again, I've never had a child, but people say after labor is over, you kind of forget. The brain releases all these endorphins and it all becomes hazy. I do feel that way a little bit with the book. I thought when I was writing it, I was telling people I'm never going to write another book again. And now I'm like, well, maybe if I find the right topic, I could think of something else. I could do it again.
Yeah.
So you do forget a little bit.
You look very well rested for somebody who's on
I did get a facial last week. So important.
Good job.
I mean, listen, we can't be messing around with that.
Okay, so you do a really great job of chronicling other people's lives. So I want to do some rapid fire about you.
Oh, okay.
Mattie Kahn.
Yes.
A woman or a girl that you look up to?
Gloria Steinem. Best book dedication ever, by the way. Makes me cry every single time.
No matter where you are,
the
what
tears
time.
fall. I could read it in an airport, like the least romantic place in the world, and I'm thanking that doctor. Good for him.
Also, I think I've cried at the airport more than any other place.
Okay, fair enough. They are pumping something into the air there, but yes.
I agree. What you've learned from the generation of women above you and below you?
Above me, I would say take no prisoners, keep freaking going, plow through any obstacle that stands in your path. Below me, be humble.
Interesting.
They humble me.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't, because they're not humble in a beautiful way.
I know, but I see them and I feel humbled.
Okay, me too. I'm with you on that. Your favorite follow on Instagram?
It's a tie between Martha Stewart, whom I love, and who else is so great on Instagram? I mean, I guess that I just follow Vogue, and I'll follow Vogue till the end of time.
Who's a writer we should all be following?
Rebecca Traister.
The best investment you've made recently?
I bought myself, for the first time ever in my life, a piece of fancy jewelry when I finished the book and got it finally accepted from the publisher, which I am wearing today.
Oh, it's beautiful.
From Sherman Field.
Very timeless.
Yeah, thank you. Woman designer. And that is the best investment I made recently.
You deserve it.
Gift from myself.
A book that changed your life, something that everybody should read.
I read a book called Fierce Attachments. It's a memoir. It's a story of a mother and a daughter. I've read a million amazing history books. I could tell you about The Swerve. I could tell you about all these other incredible books that taught me a lot. But Fierce Attachments is really the story of the bond, complicated though it may be, between women and what it means to be a woman in the world and a writer, and it changed my life totally.
Okay, we do a pretty smart question.
Okay.
Feel free to pick between the cards. Question everything.
Who do people say you remind them of? Okay, twice people have said I look like Cate Blanchett, which I really consider.
That's a good one.
Yeah, and it happened 2 times, and obviously I've been alive for many, many days, but 2 times is all I need to be able to confidently say it in public.
Agreed.
I don't know. I guess some people say that I remind them of like the nosiest person that they've ever met, but I consider that a compliment.
When I was younger, they told me I was the bossiest person they'd ever met, and I also consider that a compliment.
I mean, it is.
Yeah. Smartest decision you've ever made?
Smartest decision I've ever made, to decide to be a writer. I mean, I could have decided to do anything else or thought this is going to be way too hard, and I decided to do it anyway.
No limits.
None.
Mattie Kahn, thank you for joining us on Pretty Smart.
Thank you for having me. This was an absolute pleasure.
It's awesome.